about how turmoil had hit the Middle East and Egypt, always causing problems, the revolution in Iran, and now we're going to shift gears and go back towards Southeast Asia and tell you what's happening there. If you remember, the area that we used to know as Indochina included Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Vietnam, of course, won their war for their independence. They reunited as a communist nation. And at the same time, there are problems brewing in Cambodia. The Communist Party within Cambodia had become more popular. A group called the Khmer Rouge is going to establish power in Cambodia, Khmer being the name of the native people and language there, and Rouge meaning red in French. This group was going to establish themselves as the authority in Cambodia. And at the top of the list of the people in the Communist Party in Cambodia was this very strange looking fellow, Pol Pot. Yes, that really is the name that he goes by, Pol Pot. And Pol Pot and his communists in Cambodia have a very peculiar idea for what they envision as the future. They wanted to create a true agrarian society where everyone lived on these farms and people would be happy. It would be a workers' paradise of sorts. So at gunpoint, they force people to leave the cities. They literally evacuate all major urban areas in Cambodia and force people to go live on farms and do work there. The purpose of this is still, I mean, I don't even know how anyone would envision that this would be a functional form of a society. But they also sought to get rid of any intellectual influences, and it was such a bizarre scene that the Khmer Rouge in charge of Cambodia, was known for basically executing anybody who might provide a different perspective or ideas, including those intellectuals. And the way that they identified if somebody was an intellectual was maybe not what you'd think. You think they might just target people like professors or educated individuals, but they decided anybody who was an intellectual was anybody who wore glasses. That's what signified if somebody was an intellectual or not. And it was an indiscriminate form of killing where they would not only get rid of the intellectuals, but get rid of any political enemies themselves. Pol Pot's regime is absolutely brutal. They started becoming popular in the early 70s, and by 1975, they had seized control and started work on pushing everybody out to the farms in this agrarian society. They also would refer to themselves in peculiar ways. For example, Pol Pot went by essentially another name. He called himself Brother Number One, identifying that he was in the lead of the Communist Party in the leadership position of Cambodia, and at the same time, his next in line would be Brother Number Two, and so on down the line. They thought about humanity in such a way that they were going to take any idea of communism that had been tried and go well beyond that in the future. The result is absolutely devastating for Cambodia. You see here piles of the remains of human beings, and this is something that is going to be on a catastrophic level. Cambodia is not a big nation in terms of geographic size or population, but the Khmer Rouge is probably responsible for somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million dead, if not more. Numbers are a little bit tricky because they didn't actually have the best record keeping at the time. It is a third world nation. It was the 1970s. But we know that the Khmer Rouge gets rid of a lot of individuals. Now, there are several reasons that we bring this up, but one of the things we want to point out in this particular situation is that the world kind of stands by and doesn't do anything. Nations like the United States, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, they're just kind of letting it happen. Nobody intervenes until, ironically, later in the 1970s, it's the neighboring country of Vietnam that sends its army across the border and gets Cambodia under control. Pol Pot himself escapes capture, and he actually lives out in the jungles for a long time. I don't think he dies until 1997, which, that's a long time to be on the run, but he eludes justice for the better part of 15 years. That is absolutely absurd to think about, but that's the world that we live in. The United States had no intention of getting involved in Cambodia for a number of reasons. One of which is they're like, we're not going back to that region of the world. And they also thought that Cambodia would be a good counterweight or an irritant to Vietnam. And they wanted to do anything to get back at Vietnam. Now, another situation that's going to develop as Cambodia finally gets under control, you're going to see the Soviet Union make a surprise move and invade Afghanistan in the late 1970s. Remember, the Soviet Union was supposed to be this union of nations, of course, led by Russia, but it incorporates a lot of different nations and ethnicities. You see Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Belarus. There's a number of nations that are part of the Soviet Union. And here's the thing, if you look at the countries, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, right to the south of them, you see with a little blue line on it, Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is a neighboring country of Iran. And the Soviet Union sees this as an opportunity, and it's also a concern. Remember, we just talked about how Iran had a Muslim revolution, an Islamic revolution, where they installed a theocracy. And this makes the Soviet Union a little bit nervous because you can see they share a little bit of a border with Iran, and they are afraid of this radical Muslim sentiment of spreading to not only the Soviet Union but neighboring Afghanistan as well. And so they launch a surprise invasion into Afghanistan, and initially the invasion goes remarkably well. The Soviet Union's army invades the major urban areas and takes control of the cities without much problem. They had a communist leader who was kind of a puppet leader put in place, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. However, there are resistance fighters who live in the more rural areas known as the Mujahideen. These individuals are a guerrilla force, kind of like the Viet Cong was in the Vietnam War. And you see these guys are going around with small arms, fighting off the Soviet Union wherever they get an opportunity. Afghanistan is a land with a lot of mountainous region, a lot of caves, a lot of places to hide. And the local populations are not going to sell out the Mujahideen in order to help the Soviet Union. Now, these Mujahideen are fighting and hanging on the best they can, and they're going to get some help. The United States sees an opportunity to embarrass the Soviet Union and make life difficult for them. So the United States starts getting involved here. One of the people that we help out in this situation is a guy by the name of Osama bin Laden. We start supplying weapons and other materials to the Mujahideen, which include Osama bin Laden. Back then, he's a friend of the United States because he's fighting off the Soviet Union. Bin Laden himself, of course, will become more noted for starting the group known as Al-Qaeda and helping to formulate the attack on September 11th. But in the 1980s, we saw him as a valuable instrument to help fight against the Soviet Union. The United States also responds in a number of capacities, including calling off its Olympic team from participating in the 1980 Olympics that were scheduled to be held at Moscow. The United States saw that as like a nice big middle finger to the Soviet Union, and it puts a damper on the Olympics because most Olympians know that if the United States isn't there, you're missing out on some of the prime competition. Several other Western European nations follow suit, and they withdraw from the Olympic Games as well, and it kind of puts a damper on things. So the United States is going to be busy helping these Mujahideen fight off the Soviet Union, and this is an invasion that lasts for the better part of a decade. The Soviet Union thinks that it can control Afghanistan, and as many nations have found out, the local population is good at hiding, they're good at fighting people off, and using those guerrilla tactics. Right? We'll get into Latin America and Africa in our next video.